Hello and welcome to today's video, which is about Pressure, which is the new game by Jonathan Hicks, and it's a sort of sequel to Those Dark Places. It's the same rule set effectively in the same universe, and it's almost the same size book, but rather irritatingly, if you notice here, it's just slightly bigger, which is a little bit irritating, but there you go. Now, Those Dark Places was a super light, thin rulebook, and I really liked it. It's great for that industrial sci-fi, alien, outland, sort of blue-collar worker thing. Pressure, though, is slightly different. So although it's the same rules and the same setting, you're now special operatives. So you're a little bit more competent. And as I say, the rules have been tweaked slightly to be a bit more rounded. So Those Dark Places, space truckers dealing with gribbly things. Pressure, same design aesthetic, but now you're dealing with people who might shoot back. You're going out to take them out. There's a little bit of, lore on the back there, saying how you're special operatives. Looking forward to getting a game with this. Now, what I loved about Those Dark Places was this very elegant character sheet where you'd have your attribute and then a crew position. And the way it worked is roll a d6, add your attribute, add your crew position, which would either be a +2 or +1, depending on if Helm was your primary and Science Officer was your secondary. Pressure, as I say, gets rid of that. Instead of crew positions, you now have 5 skills to pick from for each attribute. You can have a maximum of a +6 bonus. So you roll a d6, you add your attribute, you add your skill, beat a target number. Virtually the same, and I can see it being very easy to move Those Dark Places across to the rule set that's present here in Pressure. It's the same setting, it's basically the same rules, it's just slightly more of a rounded RPG, and is probably a much better purchase for someone who hasn't got either of these games. Now, as you can see, the contents, a nice short and sweet introduction that also does talk a little bit about Those Dark Places. Your officer's briefing, which is again quite short. It's in that sort of conversational style that was in Those Dark Places. So we've got combat, damage, pressure, experience, money and vehicles have been added to much better effect than what was in Those Dark Places. So it's a much more rounded RPG. And as you can see here, there's a load of extra stuff about starships, NPCs, a lot more stuff about the setting, in particular orientation briefing, so page 77 to about 110, so that's good to see. And of course there's also an adventure, the Foster Report, which is 15-ish pages, so that's really good. It does also have a case file, and of course it's got this brilliant art style from Those Dark Places, which I guess you'll love or hate. Ignore that little blob there, I'm not sure what that's doing there, it's a bit of stray ink by the looks of it. So it leads you in quite nicely. Nice shout out to Foss here in this imagery, by the way. And also you'll notice on the other page, it's sort of like, think about who your character is, where did they come from, what's their motivation. So, there's a lot of stuff in here in very tightly written dialogue. Gotta love the art style and the way the rules are written. It is a little bit odd that it's, rather than rules, it's sort of someone walking you through the stuff. So talks here about attributes, so you've got charisma, agility, strength, education, and instead of doing the 4-3-2-1 spread, you've got 10 points to spend, which can actually give you a 4-3-2-1 spread. So instead of crew positions, we've got the skills, so education, you've got computers, engineering, medicine, navigation and science. Really, really nice design, and it'd be good to see a translator for Those Dark Places into these skill sets, so a Helm Officer would have these skills, for example. It does talk here on the page I'm showing you on the left about the maximum of +6, so be aware if you go for a 4 in your attribute, you'll only ever be able to get to level 2 on your skills. Your attributes never change. In fact, they might go down as you get injured. It talks about the levels of success, again very familiar from Those Dark Places, where basically you succeed, you fail, or you partially succeed. You've also got the option to play as Sam, a robot, effectively. The damage and combat's still pretty dangerous. Doesn't seem to have been buffed that much, so you're going to want a medic, you're going to want armor, and you're going to want to avoid getting shot. And curiously, damage is 1d6, but it's capped by the type of weapon you're using. So yeah, make sure you've got a medic. It's really, really lethal, this game. and as I say, very similar to those dark places, which is an interesting choice, bearing in mind that you're going to be a bit more competent. The pressure rolls are a very sweet and simple way of having you go a bit nuts in space. So if you have an episode, you roll 1d6. I mean, look at that artwork, that's great. Money and equipment and experience and earnings and vehicles and starships are all in here. Another nice little name there for a ship, and also how you can actually name your starships is a bit more clearly described here. So this is basically just more of the same. So if you loved those dark places, I think you're going to like Pressure. If you hated it, there's a little bit more here that might help. Those dark places, super light, maybe a bit too light. Pressure, a bit more crunch. So those dark places, great for the blue collar worker, but easy to move into Pressure. I think those dark places, it's almost a bit of a dead product now. Now the case file, it's basically just a character sheet. I don't think it looks as nice in Pressure. I would be tempted to take those dark places one and modify it, because although it looks perfectly fine, it's just not quite as elegant as the one you got here in those dark places. So where it says crew positions, I'd be tempted just to wipe that out and replace that with the skills you have. Yeah, it's a bit of a design failure for me. But yeah, as you can see, very similar design ethic, virtually the same rule set, exactly the same setting. Really solid product. I'm pleased I've got both, but as I say, those dark places, don't bother with it. I think get Pressure. It's probably easier to port from those dark places to Pressure. And what I will say is, whilst Osprey hasn't really done much with those dark places, Jonathan Hicks himself has, and I'm sure it's going to be the same with Pressure. Hopefully Osprey give a bit more love to Pressure, but if they don't, Jonathan almost certainly via Drive-Thru RPG will be releasing lots of adventures and ideas, obviously within the scope of what Osprey allow him to do. So those dark places, probably still worth picking up if you can get it cheap, but for me it's been totally eclipsed by Pressure. Pressure is a much better, more fully rounded RPG, and as I say, it does risk maybe moving itself from the super light category to being challenged by lots of other games out there. So when those dark places came out, unfortunately the timing meant it was competing with Aliens, which of course is Free League's Mutant Year Zero game. Of course Traveller is always there in the background. Mothership second edition might be coming out soon. I would say Pressure's slightly simpler than Mothership first edition, but obviously not as lightweight as those dark places, which I think for many people is maybe just a little bit too hands off. But I've really come to enjoy super light rules these days. I think they actually are more realistic, allow much more creativity, much more role playing. But you might not be that sort of person. If you're a real, tactical, crunchy sort of player, maybe there's other games you might want to be looking at right now. Pressure maybe isn't for you, but if you found those dark places a little bit too lightweight, Pressure might have just enough to swing you back to it. But it is still a lightweight game. But as I say, the two games together have created a really nice body of work, and I'm looking forward to getting this played over on the game group I hang out with over on Raspberry Raven, and hopefully we might be able to tempt Jonathan back. He has actually run a few games on that server. So yeah, my summary, I guess, is Pressure is more of the same, but slightly better. It's a slightly cleaner design, and I think it's what those dark places should have been in the first place. I would have loved for them to have brought out Pressure with those dark places sort of bundled in with it. But if you want to pick it up, Osprey Direct, Amazon, or Drive-Thru RPG, depending on whether you want physical or PDF. So yeah, thoroughly recommend. Until the next video, happy gaming.